to our Celestial Systems webinar using Scalable Vector Graphics, or SVG, in React. My name is Mark Guzmano, and I will be your host for the next 45 minutes or so. Then we will take some questions from all of you. Just a little bit of background on myself. I'm a web application developer, architect, been doing web-based work for quite a while, and most recently doing quite a bit of work with React. So I'm excited about the presentation we have today. Looking forward to any questions that any of you may have. Hopefully you'll learn something and be able to apply it to what you're doing on your applications. So let's go ahead and get started. So what's the idea of this webinar? Really, it's the idea that we're all building business applications, and those business applications tend to be very data-centric. We need to display that data in some meaningful way to the users of our applications. And a lot of times we use charts, and there are a lot of good charting packages out there to do pie charts and bar graphs and spider charts, all sorts of things. But sometimes a chart is not good enough. Sometimes we want to do something that goes beyond charting. That's when products like D3, which is a popular data visualization library, can assist us in creating things that will display our data beyond what we can do with standard graph packages. The D3 library, as we'll learn, uses the capabilities of the browser to produce essentially any drawing you want using a technology called SVG. And so we'll look at something like D3 to see if that might be the right solution when you need to do beyond graphic packages type presentation. And doing it within React, I'll even introduce the fact that you can do some of these SVG type things now right within React. So we're going to look at examples of how you do that. So the whole idea here really came to me through a new customer reporting requirement that we have that we're working on with one of our customers. And it gave me some motivation to think through how I might solve that customer issue through the tools and technologies that are available on the web. And as you would assume, the issue went beyond charts, which is why we're talking here. So in that case, we're going to drill into the options for doing beyond charts, doing data visualizations. And then the good stuff is the demonstrations. I try to keep my demonstrations simple, to the point, so that you can use them as a basis for your learning and for your expanding of your application's capabilities on the data visualization side. So let's jump in to the presentation and look at what this motivation is. So this is a screenshot of some of the design work for a particular customer requirement that we have. It's a matrix with rows showing areas that a particular person would be trained on. Each column is the person itself. And in each cell of the matrix, there can be what looks like a pie chart and what is called in the industry a Harvey ball, which represents either progress in training, or it might represent whether the training is still valid or if someone's training is expired. So there's an aspect of how many wedges in the pie are filled in. There's actually 4 wedges that can be filled in. There's an aspect of time, green meaning that the certification for that particular user in that area trained is valid. Yellow meaning that it's going to expire, and red meaning that it has expired. So we've got a lot going on in this matrix. We also have summarization at the bottom, how many things or how many areas are those workers qualified for. We have some interesting ways that we're showing revision number. You can click on either the area or the customer, and there's an ability to click on the Harvey ball itself. So I looked at this from a customer requirement and I said, boy, I don't think I'm going to find a charting library that is going to be able to produce this, especially at the granularity of requirements of clicking on items and bringing up dialogues from those items. I just didn't see that I would be able to do that from a traditional charting library. So that's where my motivation went, to look beyond charts. And really, when you go out there and you look, you really look towards the category of user experience called data visualization. Being able to take data and visualize it in some very creative way, even things you might not think of. One of the most popular data visualization libraries for JavaScript is D3, which is an open source library. And that library is available, as I said, as a Java module, as a Java add-in to your application, and allows you to build these visualizations, or as D3 calls them, data-driven documents. You really get a feel for what data visualization could be if you look at some of the examples that are a part of the D3 site. So you can see here in this gallery some examples that look kind of like charts. You know, here's one that has a bar chart, but if I click on this bar chart, you'll notice there's something very unique about it. The bar chart is moving. This is a popular thing recently, to have like a bar chart race. Over time, you know, the bar chart is growing and shrinking depending on the data for a given year. Or you may see some visualization based on a map. So you may have a map of data and then some visualization or some information that's part of your data that you want to overlay on a map. And there are quite a few of those in here. You can do things like bubble charts or circle packing, or the ability to demonstrate different dimensions to data, different associations of data. You'll notice here as I drag my mouse over here that I can click on things and zoom into those things. So what me going through this gallery is really explaining to you is that with a library like D3, you can build whatever you can imagine. I mean, there's some people here that have imagined all these different visualizations, and you're really not limited to what I'm showing you here. There could be anything that you come up with that can be drawn into a web browser. So that was pretty intriguing, the fact that I could essentially do whatever I needed to do with this library and make that appear right integrated with my application. So that's really what we're talking about here. We saw that there are many cool visualizations I could learn from, I could base my application from. So D3 is definitely a library that I could consider to build a unique data visualization. But D3 has a very unique programming model. It's actually a product that's been around for a while, a library that's been around for a while. It has a certain style of how you interact with the data and how you interact with the browser. It turns out that D3 is really a web browser standard under the covers, SVG, Scalable Vector Graphics. So D3 was designed to make building SVG applications a lot easier. But D3 takes over when you start programming with it. The challenge with that and a library like React is that React wants to, quote unquote take over. It wants to draw the user interface. It wants to use its virtual DOM to make performance make really well-performing applications. D3, on the other hand, wants to take care of things at the DOM level. So there's a little bit of a mismatch between a library like D3 and a framework like React. But you can use D3 with React. That is totally something that's possible. And over the course of the last few years, there have been some libraries that have been trying to better integrate React with D3. I found one that was popular for a while, but it's kind of old right now. But you can use D3 in a more basic level within React. So I think the best example that I've found in terms of what I mean by all of this is this link that I'll make available to you guys in the final page, which is a discussion of how you can integrate D3 into React. So if I just scroll down a little bit, you'll get a little bit of an example of that. So the first thing that this thing talks about, this particular website, is using React directly with SVG. So as I mentioned, D3 is a library that manipulates scalable vector graphics. But recently, React allows you to directly get at the scalable vector graphics. So let me kind of do this in reverse order. If you look at this example right here, which I have, and I'll show you in more details, this is the typical way that you interact with D3 in a React application. The key here is that we're creating a reference and using that reference to define the interaction, which means we're not using the React virtual DOM. So you can start seeing here that immediately what I do if I'm doing development with the D3 library, I am using a reference, which is a DOM element, and I'm starting to do things in a D3 way. You'll find many of the examples that are out there for D3 using this style. So what's nice about the fact that you can do this in React is if you find an example for some visualization and they give you the source code, it's probably in D3 format, and it is very much adaptable to a React application. We'll go into this a little bit more in a bit here. But this is what really starts bringing some interesting flavor to React. I don't have to use a library like D3. I can now, recently in React, one of the subversions of version 16, I believe, brought SVG as a first-class citizen into the JSX environment. And JSX in React is the way you code in your components. JSX being a mix of the syntax that you're familiar with HTML and JavaScript. So I can now directly create SVG elements just like I create elements like divs and spans right within my React JSX. And that's kind of going to be the flavor that I'm going to discuss as we move forward in this discussion. So you have several options if you want to use this data visualization capability. You can use React and the traditional D3 way of developing, which you saw takes over, needs a DOM node, and really writes directly to the DOM. Or you can use SVGs natively in your React JSX. So let's explore that a little bit more. So to do that, I've created a demo app that I'm going to show you. Very simple. I wanted to give you all the instructions of how I created this demo app. And it's an app created with Create React App, which is provided by the React environment, allows you to generate the structure of a React app very quickly. I tend to use this template that's out again also on NPM called minimal, because it doesn't generate anything that I have to delete. So if you generate a Create React app and you don't use template minimal, you'll get a little user interface, you'll get a style sheet, you'll get a logo that's in an SVG file. All those things you tend to delete before you start building your application. If you use the minimal template, it truly is minimal and you don't have to delete anything. So I start with a minimal template. I create a React app. And NPX, by the way, if you've never seen that, that is a capability of the NPM repository to always get the latest version of Create React App. So it's not, Create React App isn't necessarily copied to my system. I'm always getting the latest version before I run it. So that's a nice little thing to do. So you're always getting the latest version of things. And then I've added to package.json a few things to make the work that I want to demonstrate to you a little bit easier. I want to use a few material UI components and icons. Material UI is a very popular component library, open source, to give you the ability to use different components in your application. So things like tree views and tabs and buttons, things that enhance your application. And obviously by its name, it's built on the Material UI standard that Google has created. So I'm going to use a couple of things from Material UI. So that's one of the elements that are in here. I'm obviously going to show you some D3 related capabilities. So I need to bring the D3 library in. And just for grins, I happen to realize that version 18 of React is just around the corner. And they've started providing some alpha versions of version 18. We're currently on version 1702 or something like that is the latest. But I said, you know, it'd be interesting just for the heck of it to try all these examples with this alpha of version 18, just to see what happens. So I brought those in. And then one last thing I brought in that I'll talk about is a library that enhances the SVG experience. It's called React Spring. It allows you to animate in a very creative way SVG elements. So I've added all those to package.json. The end result is this project right here. So you'll notice that it is a typically structured Create React app application. Package.json is exactly what I just showed you. It also has React scripts because I'm using Create React app. It has the typical start, build, test, and eject script functions. If I look at the starting point for a typical Create React app, that is here in index.js. All I'm doing here is I am rendering the app component to the root element. Again, this is out of the box Create React app. The app component happens to be the area that I started making changes. And that's where I'm going to start describing what this is. You'll actually see that this app component here is utilizing an app bar and the tabs component from the Material UI application or the Material UI open source library. So you can see here I've got a lot of import references to that Material UI application. What that gives me is the ability to create basically a set of tabs across the top of my page. So I can show you several demos along with the other examples in a tabbed layout. So that's really why I'm using that. And as you can see, I have different either D3 or SVG examples in each of these tabs. So that's the demo app that we're going to go through. The Material UI environment is very nice. I just thought I'd throw a slide in here just to give you a sense of how you use it. In this particular case, as I said, I have an app bar, which is this blue or purplish type bar on the top here. And then I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tabs. So those 6 tabs are represented by a tabs component and then 6 child tabs. Each of these tabs, when you click on them, will bring up a tab panel. And that tab panel will bring up a unique component. And in those unique components is where I built either D3 or SVG examples. So we've got a D3 React example, we've got an SVG React example. You get the idea. So we're going to spend time at this level here, but just to give you an idea and a feel for the application itself. Okay, so let's go back to that conversation. We want to build some really interesting data visualizations. We like the capabilities of D3, but we have to figure out how to use this unique programming model that D3 has within a React application. And this really is the substance of what you have to do. And this is a very valid use case. As I said, many, many, many very good D3 visualizations that you're going to want to copy are in the D3 programming model format. So you're going to want to be able to adapt those to your React application. So you'll notice here that what I have to do to make these work is I have to take an SVG control, which is the root of how you draw anything in D3 or in SVG directly, and I have to get a reference to that component. References in React give us the underlying DOM element for that particular reference. So this ref through useRef dot current will give me the DOM element that represents that SVG environment. So I'm taking the DOM element and I'm starting to write D3 code. So D3.select is a D3 function. It produces an SVG element. SVG element.append of a circle is a D3 command. It says draw a circle. And for its attributes, make its X and Y coordinates 150 and 70 and make its radius or the size of it, make that 50. So the radius is half the diameter, which is how big the circle should be drawn. So this example in D3 produces this. Very simple. It's a circle, but as you can see here, I can draw it anywhere I want. I can draw it in any radius. Circle is one of many things I can draw, as we'll see. It's a fundamental building block of SVG. We'll see a few more in a bit, but this is the React integration with D3. Taking that same example and now realizing that in React, I can use SVG and all of its elements directly. Here's the example using those capabilities. Instead of, in the previous slide, me having to instantiate an instance of D3's SVG element, doing an append, creating attributes. This is very programming oriented. SVG in React is quite simple. I can just write SVG elements in JSX. So you can see here I have an SVG root, and then I have a circle element, which has attributes, CX, CY, and radius. So think of what you can do with SVG being just like what you can do with divs. I can create any div I want in JSX. I can have those divs be generated dynamically or the attributes be generated dynamically. I can do the exact same thing with SVG. So I could have this circle be have a dynamic radius based on some prop or based on some state value that I might be producing in my application. Very consistent programming model to what we're used to with everything else in React. And that opens up a lot of doors, in my opinion. That opens up the ability to use React and its style of programming to generate SVG visualizations. So that's really the first decision you have to make. Am I going to use a library like D3 and follow its standard way of developing, or am I going to use the React way of doing things? I'm going to show you how we've started to use the React way of doing things to create some very interesting SVG-based visualizations. Before we get into that, let me just talk about some of the fundamental elements you have in SVG. You have basic text. Well, let me actually go to the example here. You have basic text, which you can put anywhere on the screen. You can change its orientation. You can change the way it looks. I just happen to just write some text out here, but it could be sideways. It could be anywhere you want. I have rectangles, and I can define all of the parameters or all of the attributes. Its border style, its interior color. The border style is actually called the stroke. So it's stroke, how many pixels the stroke uses, the starting X and Y, the ending X and Y. I can put things on an angle. We already saw a circle. We have a line. And then this one is interesting. It's called a path. The path keyword allows me to draw any arbitrary symbol given a path statement. So for example, if I go over to this example in the code here, let me show you the example that I'm showing you right there. Here it is right here. So in this particular case, I am using the React way of SVG. And I'm actually blending in regular HTML and SVG. So let's look at this JSX here and let's see what it's telling us. So I have a div that starts out with an SVG. There is something called a group element in SVG that allows me to transform the starting point. So in other words, I want this text to draw at X, 0, Y, and 10, but I want the translation starting point to be 10, 10, so I can start moving things to unique places. But you can see here, I'm just using a regular SVG text element. The next one is a regular SVG rectangle element. So it's a rect. And you can see here that I'm using X and Y, width and height. Here's some of those other attributes, the stroke, the fill. I can set opacity levels, things like that. Here's circle again. There's the line. And then here's that very interesting path element. What you do with the path element in this D attribute is you give it coordinates upon which it follows a path to draw. So we start at 150, we go to 350, we draw a line, 75 to 40, another line, and then Z says, go to the starting point. So basically, this is the path command to draw a triangle, because that's what I have on the screen here, is a triangle. But I can draw any arbitrary thing I want with path. So rectangles, circles, lines, paths give me the ability to do all sorts of things. And then this last one starts to become the result of utilizing all of those capabilities. This is a matrix being drawn with numbers inside of it. So it's using various capabilities of SVG. And you'll notice here that I don't have low-level SVG commands to be creating that element. I literally have a component, a React component that I called matrix. Matrix doesn't exist. It's something I wrote. And here's where the power starts coming in. I can use the power of React to create components with props and render functions and things like that to be able to build arbitrarily interesting SVG visualization. So we're not going to go into this in great depth right now, but you'll notice that the matrix component ends up being a mixture of SVG with JSX and data manipulation. This to a React programmer is very familiar. So it's the integration of what you can do with SVG and what you can do with React JSX And this ends up building the matrix with the lines on it. So that's where the power starts coming in. You could use the D3 model, which has its own way of doing things like this, or as you start building up your skills with React and SVG, you can build those same sort of capabilities within React. And you are keeping the power of JSX, the virtual DOM, all those things are intact when you're doing something like this sort of programming, because we're doing it in the way that React wants you to do those things. So those are kind of some of the fundamental ways you can use the capabilities of SVG. We're going to spend a little bit more time on this matrix. I've got a specific example, but I want to give you a few more things to think about as you're considering your data visualization needs. So going to the next example, that's in here, you can see that I'm actually animating some SVG elements. So I'm just, making them animate in and out, and they actually animate like a spring, like a spring you would have in a car engine. That if you pull it out, it'll pull in and then pull out and then slowly stop. So it's got a spring type activity. Or if you, let's take a swing and you swing it, it'll go back and forth, and then it'll slowly stop. That's really what's represented here. I used a library, a Spring React library, and I integrated it with React and with SVG. So the key here is that there are third-party libraries, third-party React libraries that might be very valuable if you choose the path of building your SVG animations using React. And I just thought this Spring one was an interesting one. So to give you a little idea how that's done, here's the demo right here. So the Spring library comes as a hook, a React hook. So here's the React Spring library. Here's the used Spring hook. And basically through the configuration of the hook, you specify how the animation works. In this particular case, for the circle, I want to loop it, which is why it's continuously doing its animation, from a radius of 10 to a radius of 30. So go from 10 to 30 to 10 to 30. So you can imagine the ball going out bigger and smaller and bigger and smaller. And then what's really cool about this animation library is you can configure things like, what's the tension on the line that's doing this spring? What's the friction? How precise do you want me to be? And this is all very simple attributes. And then on the bottom here, you'll notice that the way I use these spring-oriented capabilities is I bring out another element from the React Spring library called animated. And I just prefix whatever SVG element I want to use. So for a regular circle, I would do these things. But for an animated circle, I not only do these things, but it applies the props that I defined for that animation. And you actually do that in this variable right here because I'm animating the radius in this particular case. Same thing is true with the text. I want to have animated text, and I'm using the Spring animated X, and I could do that on some other value, but I just chose to do it just for X. So the text is only moving left to right because the only thing I'm animating is the X axis, but I could animate whatever I want. So that's why I'm getting the effect of this text moving from left to right. So the point here isn't necessarily that you're going to use this particular library, although you can. But the fact is that there are an ever-growing number of libraries that can be applied to your JSX, and this one is particularly applicable to building some really, really interesting a data visualization, because usually those data visualizations have a lot of really cool animations in them. If you go back to the gallery here and you look at the one that I pulled up originally, there's interesting animations here when I click. So see how it kind of zooms in, or when I click back on this, it zooms back out. So users of these very rich animations start expecting not only a cool visualization, but a cool presentation or a cool animation effect. So you may want to also add that to enhance the experience that a user is going to have with your visualization. So you can do that pretty directly with React SVG. And then the last demo here is just focusing in on my initial issue. So if we go back to the initial slide that I showed you, which was my business problem, come back all the way up to this. I'm trying to build this, or I have a customer requirement to build this. So if you start looking at this problem from an SVG point of view, you start seeing that, okay, we have a matrix here, but the matrix here is really just a series of rectangles. So here's the first rectangle, here's the second rectangle, here's the third rectangle, and those rectangles are just drawn at different offsets. So this one's at 0, 0. This one is, however, whatever the width of the column is, it starts there, etc. That makes up one row. The next row, the Y parameter is one width, and then you start all over again. So this matrix is a perfect implementation of some sort of a loop or two loops, one to get all the rows, and then one to draw each column. So the intersection of a row and a column being a cell. And then within that cell, maybe you want to draw a Harvey ball. Maybe you want to put a number in it, as we have down here. Maybe you want to put text in it. So really that drawing function is independent of drawing the matrix. All you want to be able to say is, for each cell, I need to draw. I need a function that knows how to draw for each cell. So what kind of things do we have here? We have how wide is a column, how tall is a row, where does it start, and what do I draw, or a function that knows how to draw inside of that cell. So let's look at the implementation using React techniques of drawing that matrix. Let's go back to the matrix here. Well, let's actually go back to the demo of the user interface of the matrix. So you'll notice that a matrix, which is from here to here, the way we defined it is we said, okay, we said we need to know where it starts, which we called that the X and Y translate. We need to know how big a row width is. We call that the band X, or the band of one X coordinate and the band of Y. So we want those to be equal. So this tells the matrix how to draw. The data parameter is the data to the matrix. So for each cell, the data is going to show you what needs to be drawn. So for example, each row, and then with each row, each column. And I'm not going to go into the details here, but this is a very data-driven drawing capability. And then the other really nice thing is that this is allowing the matrix to draw. We provide a render function prop. So we say, no matter how many matrix elements you're going to draw, no matter how many rows, no matter how many columns, a given cell uses this function to draw. So render text is an individual cell, and we can really simplify the function here by saying, okay, this render text function doesn't have to know much except that it's drawing a text field and how big it has to draw itself. So this becomes a very nice function that's just a parameter to this matrix. So the idea here is we're taking all of our knowledge of React, all of our ability to componentize a problem. We're applying it to SVG, and we're utilizing additional libraries like the Spring library to really bring our data visualizations to life within React. So I really feel that this approach is a much more React-friendly approach. It's going to allow us for sure to build this customer's capabilities and other things. And it keeps us within the spirit of React. We're still using JSX. We're still using the capabilities, for example, of mapping over data. If we take a look at the code again for the matrix, now with a little better feel for what we're doing, remember, we're sending data in that is essentially the rows and columns of data. So if we were to uncover what the matrix is doing, the matrix code is essentially mapping through the data, and for each row it finds, it maps through that row to find a column, writing the appropriate SVG, which happens to be the square or the rectangle lines in the cell. So it's using a rectangle to do that. So this particular square is drawn once we know what cell we're in. And then once we get to that cell, since we were past a render function, we just call that render function. So this is a very simple component. I mean, it doesn't have many lines at all, but it really gives us the power to draw any matrix, any size. It's all data driven, and the render can be whatever you want. So we not only have a render function for what we're building for this particular customer that is for rendering a rendering text, but we have a render function that will render a Harvey ball. So the Harvey ball render, so it would be, you know, when that is one of those Harvey balls, it's going to be a lot more complex. We need to know how many slices are supposed to be what color, but it's all still the same concept. We're drawing one particular cell, and we're making that cell available within the matrix. So this approach, I think, is proving to be a very, very intriguing approach. And I think as we move forward with other interesting data visualizations with customers, we're going to be building more and more of those in React with native SVG. So that's kind of the point here. And I wanted to keep it simple, as I said, because I want to allow you guys to create your own interesting data visualizations. So that's the application. It gives you a lot of good motivation to build or to build upon it. The other thing I just thought would be interesting is that, as I said, React 18 is just around the corner. So since I used React 18 and I used an alpha version of it in this example, I just thought it would be helpful for any of you who may want to use this example to see what the plan for React 18 is and maybe try to use this. Now, if for whatever reason you get this example and you don't want to use React 18, you just replace these two elements, the React and the React DOM, with what's in this ZZZ package here. I put the ones that came with Create React App, which is 1702 at the time I did this. I just put them in a separate file. So you can easily just take these two, come back to the package.json, and replace lines 9 and 10, and then you're using the production version again. Obviously, you have to rebuild. You have to go do an npm install again because you're changing things. But I thought it was interesting just to see if things are working. And for these simple examples, using Material UI, things seem to be working. I mean, I'm also integrating with the Spring demo. Everything seems to be out there working for the little use case I'm using just fine. So feel free to take a look at this. I think the plan for React 18 is probably a few months away. but they're taking a very interesting approach in how they're presenting it to the developer community. They're using this React working group, and it might be interesting for you to go check it out. They're keeping things like discussions pretty public in this working group, so you can get an idea where they're at here. Here's the discussions themselves. So it might be interesting just to kind of get a feel for what's going on. Like I said, we're probably months away from the release, but it is kind of nice to know that even at this early state in the alpha, that things seem to be pretty much on track. Okay, so that's what I have for you guys. I hope you've gotten some real creative juices from this. I think you can do some awesome things with SVG and React, and I'd love to see the community start building more and more creative use cases out of this this combination. I think React makes a very nice hosting platform for dynamic visualizations, and our work with creating this matrix really proved to us that yes, you can use React and SVG directly and get a lot of the power that D3 provides you in its programming model. Not everything, but I think over time we will get more and more of that. So I think we'll move on to a little bit of Q&A, just a little bit of housekeeping here. If you are interested in the source code, just email me. It's very simple, as you see, but I'd be happy to send it to you if it'd be helpful. Also be wonderful to hear what you're trying to do or thinking of doing with some data visualizations. It's always cool to hear. I put a few of the resource links out here in case you want to get to them directly. We will make the slides available. I believe we've recorded this, but I will ask Arun as soon as we get started here. But what I'd like to do is see if we have any questions and kind of go through those and get those answered for you. So Arun, are you there? And do we have anything that we might want to discuss here?
Yes. Hello, Mark.
Hello.
So, yeah. So thank you for this very informative session.
Sure.
And thank you all for joining in. We have a few questions that have come our way. So there is one that Elmar just now asked us. So the question goes: Is there known problems with browsers using React with SVG? How is compatibility with, for example, legacy browsers like IE11?
That's a great question. I haven't fully explored all of that, but I believe that any browser that is working with the latest version of React would work. I mean, the enablement here is in React itself. Now, there probably are some browsers, IE11 may not be the best example, but certainly earlier browsers, where various aspects of SVG were not supported. So remember, SVG is a native implementation of additional tags in the browser. So we don't need React to do any of this. I could have showed you an SVG example totally in an HTML page. So think of SVG as extended tags like divs in the browser. And there are certainly browsers that are farther along than others. For example, one of the things, just to give you a little perspective on real world, what we were trying to do here, one of the things that we said was, in this example, it's great if you have a big monitor, but what if you make a small window out of this and you start scrolling this? You don't really want to scroll the entirety of this. You want to scroll just the data, and you want the columns to show up and the rows to show up, kind of like pinning a cell in Excel. You want to be able to see just this and just this. And so I said, okay, that's going to be easy. We can put an overflow CSS tag somewhere, like on the SVG root tag, and it'll just work. Well, it turns out that the overflow attribute of SVG is not very well supported. So there's a couple of answers to your question. Is React supported in its latest version in the browser? And then is the underlying SVG component model complete or complete enough? And I just don't know that specifically for IE11, but I'm sure there's a website out there somewhere that says, SVG compatibility library for browsers. I'm sure there is. So that'd be my answer is to check that out for a given browser. Okay. Any other questions?
Yes, there are a few.
All
So
right.
another question that came in is, can I adapt D3 samples for use in the React application?
Good question. Well, as you saw, you could actually
Right.
just straight out use D3 the way it's programmed. It's got a certain model. I'm going to interpret your question to say, can I adapt the D3 examples to make them direct React SVG? That's an interesting one. That would be a very cool library for someone to build. To take an existing D3 visualization upon which there are a lot of examples. So if I go back to this D3 gallery, I didn't really focus in on it, but if I click on one of these, you're going to see code on the bottom here. So if I scroll down here, just look at this code. This code is in D3 format, right? Remember I said you do a D3 create and you add attributes. So this is not React, but it would be really cool if there was a library. I haven't checked. I should check. It would be really cool if there was a library that could convert D3 syntax to React syntax. Or if someone's motivated enough, maybe they can build that. That would be really cool. So I don't know if there is, but the answer is you can use this code the way it is, but you're not really using JSX then. You're doing that ref I showed you. Or you just, you could just figure this out. I mean, the end result of this is just coding. So there's a pattern here that you probably could figure out. That's why I believe there could be a library that ultimately could do that. So that'd be interesting. So, all right, next question.
Right, Mark. So next question is, are there any limitations that you know of in using SVGs in React?
Well, I just mentioned one. I know that scrolling is kind of a challenge. I didn't find many more. Well, I'm using Chrome. I'm using the latest version of Chrome. And as you saw, I'm using a better than the latest version of React. I'm in React 18. So I haven't found many issues, many things I couldn't do. All the paths that I found seem to work. The fundamental ones, circles. I was able to draw a Harvey ball out of a circle, and a path statement drew the little slices of pie. So all of that, which to me is pretty complex SVG, I had absolutely no problems with. Now, again, you're going to have a different potential experience. I think the real question is, what level of support of SVG does the browser have? So those would be your own limitations that would be there regardless, because that's a browser thing, since SVGs are intrinsic to the browser. So we need to find that chart of, let me see. As we're talking, and maybe the next question, let's see if there is anything. So SVG support in browsers. Report tables, and maybe there's something like this is what I'm talking about. Like there should be some sort of a, yeah, there we go. There you go. So there's your support matrix. And that matrix, by the way, could be written in SVG. It might be. But there's your support matrix. And it looks like there's a lot of green on here, which is good. And of course, IE, the lower versions are the ones that have red, right? Over here. But it looks like your IE11 question, I mean, there you go. Just click into there, you can probably drill into the details. So it doesn't look like it's full support, but some support. But it looks across the board, everything else seems to be pretty green, which is a good thing. So. All right, and next question, Arun, if we have one.
Yes, there's one more question. So you mentioned that you were using an earlier version of React 18. Are you facing any issues with it?
As I mentioned, yes, I am. I think I started answering that I haven't really faced any issues. I believe I pulled the alpha version as of like 4 or 5 days ago. I intend to kind of update that, but because these examples are so simple, I mean, the only issues I may have gotten would have been in the interaction of the SVGs. But I'm using pretty typical React, and nothing's ever spit out an error, or and I've been building these examples and using the alpha version and some of the work we're doing in the customer site, and so far so good. So that's a good sign. And maybe even at this early stage, we're hopefully moving towards not a lot of issues with the newest version. So, but that's about all I can report on that. So, all right. Anything else, Arun?
No, Mark, that's about it. Those are the questions for today.
All right. Well, I really appreciate
Thank
everybody's time and being a part of this. As I said, let me bring back to the Q&A. If you are interested in any follow-up questions, or you want to get an example of the source code, just email me, mguzmano@celestialsys.com. As I said, I'd be really interested in hearing what you might be using, and if we could, if you guys needed some extra help, or you think the matrix that we're building is something similar to what you might need in your project, let us know. Maybe we can collaborate and work with you on that. So with that, I will say thank you very much, and look forward to the next time we present a webinar for you. Thank you.